All right. Dramatic countdown over once again. Brethour. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the last name.
No,
Thank you so
that's
much for coming
perfect.
on today. All right. And so I guess with your kind of specific niche with dyslexia specifically, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your kind of intro into teaching reading? How do you kind of come across dyslexia as an area of interest? And I guess why do you decide to pursue that as an area of interest?
Well, I have been teaching for 21 years-ish, and I graduated from McGill University in Quebec. And I remember leaving, I graduated a bachelor in kindergarten and elementary education. I left going, I really don't know how to teach kids to read. Like, I left there thinking, whoa, what am I supposed to do now?
Hmm.
Because the Quebec curriculum, along with many other curriculums out there, are really based on balanced literacy. If
Hmm.
you read the Quebec curriculum, it doesn't go into very explicit teaching, doesn't mention how to teach reading really. It's talking about more through osmosis, you will learn to read, read
Yeah.
a variety of different texts and genres and all that. So I left going, I really don't know how to teach reading. And I think, as we all do, we do our best.
Hmm.
And the PD that I received over the years, and I'm somebody who loves PD, just wasn't
Same.
aligned with the research at all. It was really guided reading, cozy up in a good corner, have students silently read, just expose them to books. And I did all that. I did, the three queuing, look at the pictures, all things that is not aligned with the research out there. And
Hmm.
fast forward many years later, I have a son who struggled in kindergarten. And that was like the shift that really changed. That's why I'm speaking with you today, probably because of him. I really wanted to learn more about dyslexia, even somebody who was in, taught many different grade levels, different special programs with students with learning disabilities. I felt like, oh, I do know a little bit about dyslexia, but not enough. And then I went down the, as I call it, the science of reading rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I've never gotten out. I'm still in it deep.
Hmm.
And it was really because of him that I just became obsessed, not only to help my son Benjamin, but and then it has transformed my teaching completely.
Beautiful. And I'm even, as you said, like the balanced reading approach. Because again, as I'm kind of like I've been teaching for a few years, but this is my first year like having any sort of responsibility with literacy specifically. And like I'm not necessarily in the like elementary role where you kind of get more of the like explicit instructions of like phonics and phonemic awareness and like phonological awareness and all those kind of big reading words that you kind of hear when you do a science of reading course. But I've heard there's like a lot of debate or like not even debate, but controversy. Like, what was that balanced reading thing? Like, when did it come out? Like, were you were you introduced into teaching when that already existed? Is that kind of what you were saying?
Well, I
Like
think it
what
also
is that
depends.
controversy?
Yeah, there is huge controversy with the science reading. There's so many misconceptions, not only about the science of reading. They're saying it's, this pendulum swing. We've had, the reading wars in the past, this whole language. I think my brother was taught the whole language where it was just like, you're going to be exposed to the words and it'll just be like magically, you read. And some people do read like that. And I think that's why there's this big misconception because not everybody reads that way, as we know. And I did a post not too long ago on the evolution of the reading wars and how we got here to today. And it's just unfortunately whoever I think wrote the curriculum, the team that wrote the curriculum, it's what they were taught, right? And thinking that this is the best approach. And it's almost like a lottery ticket. I see as students coming into our classroom. Do they know? Do they have a teacher who knows about the research or not?
Hmm.
Or and the same thing when I went to university, I guess depending on which professor I would have, maybe they would have been more, either balanced literacy, following the curriculum, or maybe that explicit systematic instruction that we do need. And so I look at it like that. So there has been, and I hear this all the time. It's a pendulum swing. It's a fad. It's one piece of the curriculum. It's not. It's decades and decades of research into how we learn to read, and it is a lot of research, a lot, and it can be overwhelming. I'll admit it was overwhelming for me, but you don't do everything overnight. That would be my
Hmm.
piece of advice for sure.
Yeah, because I think like even like my wife teaches kindergarten, and like she'll talk about things like UFly and Jolly Phonics. Like those are the kind of things that I often hear from her of what she's been told to use. And that was in Alberta and New Brunswick. There's some stuff about like Fontes and Pinnell I'll get to a little bit after this, but so like if you were kind of in this balanced literacy, like I just mentioned things like UFly and Jolly Phonics, like was there a specific resource that was given that like you kind of think maybe people should avoid? Like, or was there nothing given, and that was kind of the environment? Like, you're trying to produce the environment for reading, not actually teaching reading. Is that accurate?
Yes, and there's some like the philosophies I think are really embedded into what we were taught.
Mhm,
And I can only speak from my own experience, but we were really not big on programs. And I
mhm,
think our curriculum is so vague that it can be a good thing in some ways, because you can kind of do your own thing in your classroom, be that, and teachers love that, the autonomy, right? But in a profession, that's always, we should be looking to the research, right? We should be looking at, and I always use the analogy of a doctor, right? Any profession. If they're sticking with methods that are not backed by research, we would be in an uproar going, how
yeah,
is this possible? And it's a lot of information. And I think it's such a, I think it really starts from university programs. It has to start
mhm,
there and then trickle down. And anybody who's in the field now, it's really about time, right? As teachers, when do you do this? When do you do your PD? So I think it's really important that I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent
no,
though.
no, please, yeah.
So that's it. So the programs, I didn't really use a program. It was little bits and pieces of what I was taught at different PDs. So I was really about guided reading, little workshops. I would give a little workshop, and then my students would go off on their own to kind of discover, and that through that osmosis. It wasn't really explicit. And I think one of the questions you asked was about, the transformation. If I could feel myself just 5 years ago to even a year ago, your craft is always changing, right? I do use UFly in several of my groups, my intervention groups, and it's so explicit. But even though if teachers have the best program, if you don't have that background knowledge of how students learn to read, it's not going to be as effective. And I think there, Louisa Moats has a great quote where she says that, where you can have, the best curriculum, but it doesn't matter until the teacher understands how truly students learn to read.
And when I took because I have like an English minor, I guess, and like for teachables or whatever, but I remember I took my science of reading course in university, but it was like the way that my kind of life was scheduled at that time. Like I would drive so I had a class at 11 a.m. and I had an evening class online at 5 p.m. This was during COVID. And I would drive 4.5 hours to get home from university in between like my 12 p.m. class ending and like my 5 p.m. class starting. So I would get home after driving all day, put my headphones in for my online 3 hour evening class. And that was the science of reading one. So I still passed and still did good in the course, but like I got to actually teaching and I'm like, what is a short and long vowel sound? Like I have no idea. Like these things that kind of become so fundamental, like in how you explicitly teach it, but then I'm trying to like sit back and think of how do I explain these nonsense word sounds to kids that are like struggling with reading? I was like, I have no idea. So I guess to kind of piggyback on my experience, like what do you think are some of the bigger mistakes that you made in teaching kids to read earlier in your career that you kind of would change now? Do you kind of do more groups on like a small level? Like did you used to kind of do more classroom stuff? And has that changed from grade to grade as well?
Well, so much has changed. As I said, it's night and day.
Mhm.
In terms of, I'm trying to think, the transformation. So there's so many myths. I think that's a huge piece when it comes to the science of reading. So I used to think reading was natural, like you're just exposed to books, but it's not, as we know now, it's not like speaking, and
Mhm.
that's it. We need to be explicitly taught. So that was something that I think also our curriculum in Quebec seems to think too, is, you just expose students to read. Even as a parent to a child with dyslexia, I heard like people ask me, did you read with your son? Is that why he's
Mhm.
struggling? Is that why he's dyslexic? And I mean, an avid reader. I have tons of books. As teachers, I think we're a hoarder,
Yeah.
buying lots and lots of, books. I don't
Even
even
if
want
I'll
to show
never
you.
look at it, it looks cool on the shelf.
My behind here is very
Guilty.
organized. Don't look over there. And so that's it. There's so many misconceptions, right? And my that was one of it. Did you read to your son and expose him to books? And that was it. I read every night to him. But those misconceptions of that, I consider myself a guided reading guru, but it was really based on those three cueings. So I remember teaching a grade 1 class and covering up the picture, covering up the first like letter of the word and saying, look, if I expose it, it's what is a picture of? It's a pony, and it was a horse, and that was the
Yeah.
thing. It was like, it didn't matter how students got the meaning out of the text based on looking at the picture, skipping, a larger word. So those are all things that, if there's one piece of advice I can say, is we have to get rid of those ineffective reading strategies. It's just mind-boggling that I did not question that. It's like, take your eyes off the word and look at
Yeah.
the picture. Let's
It
do that in
almost
terms of learning how to read.
it almost feels like illegal to question it. I don't know. It's like one of those things where it's like what feels illegal but isn't. But like any sort of educational norm of whatever context you're in always feels like, no, like I actually can't say anything about this because like my evaluator told me to say that. You know what I mean? So I think that's still, I
Yeah,
don't
it's
think as
it's true.
common as it used to be. But and so you've talked about your son with dyslexia, and like I think to start, I'll try to give like a definition of what I think dyslexia is from what I've heard, and which is very minimal. But I think like all I really know about what dyslexia actually is you kind of like get the symbols reversed. Is that like a common,
That's a
like your P?
misconception.
No, 100%. And like I'm
Oh,
hoping I have
yes,
my
yes.
misconceptions. Yeah, like and these are kind of like the things that you hear of what dyslexia is. And so I guess how would you define it, and what are the misconceptions of it?
Well, it's definitely neurobiological. So you were born with it. So you can't cure dyslexia. So anybody who says let's cure it, has nothing to do with your eyes either. You might have also something to do with your eyes where you need glasses or maybe something else, but it has nothing to do with vision. So it's really a neurobiological condition, and it impacts students or anybody's ability to read accurately and fluently. So it's really about reading. It does impact their spelling too, because if you don't know your short vowels or your long vowels, it's going to be very difficult to also put that on paper. And we know that writing is so difficult for so many students because you're using so many different tools and such a cognitive load on you as well. So it's really about a reading. The brain, if you look at brain imaging, it's absolutely fascinating, where you can see the three different parts where it comes to reading. And there's one part that's really compensating for that. And they're not using the other two pieces. But after intervention, like explicit, systematic, very intense intervention, you can actually rewire the brain. So it's just so fascinating. This is why we need to be explicit and systematic, and that constant repetition, because students like my son, I'm telling you, I mean, I did a very ineffective teaching when I did it with him at home. I taught him, cover the picture, not cover the picture. That's what I did afterwards. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't look at the picture. You're not allowed looking at the picture. And I would actually cover the picture because I was like, no, you have to untrain what everybody has taught you, including me, is, use those ineffective strategies.
Mhm.
And they need lots and lots of repetition. It really does exist on a continuum from mild, moderate to severe. My son is severely dyslexic. He's double deficit dyslexic. And
So just one sec. How would you like? How does like? Let's just say I get a student with a dyslexia diagnosis, but that's all I get. Like I don't know where they are in the continuum. I don't know what the double deficit like. How do you kind of in your own way like kind of discriminate amongst the different definitions?
well, that's it. We went with a neuropsychologist, and they gave the diagnosis of a double deficit. So he has difficulty with phonological processing, which 70 to 80% of dyslexics have that difficulty. That's why that processing and manipulating the sound structure of our
Okay.
language, right?
Yep.
And he has that plus RAN, which is rapid automatized naming. So that very it takes him long. Like even you can do it with even colors. You can have a student do that and just say name the colors instead of letters,
Mhm.
because letters are sometimes difficult. So when students can't do that rapidly, like looking at the words on a page, it takes them a while. He has both. Now, most of the time in Canada and across the world, they don't use the term dyslexia, unfortunately. For whatever reason, I don't understand. I did look into it. I did a whole post on it. It really depends on the profession doing the diagnosing, but we often will see specific language impairment with reading, specific language disorder. And if parents see that or teachers see it, it really does mean dyslexia. Sometimes I'll see brackets where it says dyslexia, because I've sat on many parent teacher interviews where I've met with the psychologist or the speech and language pathologist, and they're giving the diagnosis, and the parents will go, well, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Specific learning, disorder with impairment in reading. And they're like, well, it's dyslexia. And I just don't understand why we're not using that term. Yes, then we
Mhm.
need to look into what exactly does it look like for that individual child, because there's no two dyslexics alike. We
Mhm.
also know that can co-occur with other um, neurodiverse disabilities as well, or difficulties, I should say, like ADHD, ADD, developmental language disorders. So there's a lot
Mhm.
going on for these kids, unfortunately. But they have so many strengths, and that's a whole other piece.
Oh, yeah. And it's never like I think it's like the dyslexia, dysgraphia, and like dyscalculia, which is a new one that I've been introduced to. Like the
Yeah.
triple D is not a deficiency. I think that's kind of what people need to think of. Like it's just different ways to kind of address the learner. But even if dyslexia has kind of been the main focus, have you explored much with dysgraphia or dyscalculia yourself? Like dyscalculia, if I'm even saying it correctly, is like an issue with processing in math, and
Yes.
dysgraphia is with writing.
Yes, it's
That's kind
really
of like
the
the way they
motor
differentiate it.
development, right? And I work with my school is we're a small school, but we have lots of needs. We're very an inclusive school, so we have students. We even have three regional programs, we call them, where we bus students from all over our district and bring them to our school. And most of them are a year or 2 years behind, not always having a diagnosis, but we know that we're going to try and give them that explicit systematic instruction, that evidence-based intervention and core classroom instruction. But I do a bit of math. Math is not my expertise, but I do work with some students that I do think they have dyscalculia. And I never say to any parents, even though I feel like, especially with dyslexia, that I'm pretty confident in saying, I think your child is dyslexic, but I cannot diagnose. Teachers, we cannot diagnose. But I will always be transparent with parents, saying, I think we should further investigate this. And I do use a lot of data, especially in my reading interventions in the classrooms that I work with. So yeah, I've been learning about dyscalculia as well, dysgraphia. Dys means difficulty in Greek, so this is all dysgraphia, the writing piece,
Okay.
math piece. But I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on math actually, because I'm trying everything that I can for these students, and the number sense, just the basic number sense, is so difficult.
Mhm.
And I think it's okay to say, like, you know what, this is not my expertise. I went to the teacher and she
Yeah.
knows that reading is my more expertise. And I said, you know what, I'm going to listen to some podcasts. I'm going to learn more about dyscalculia. And also, I even contacted a consultant at my school board to come and observe me teach that. So I think as teachers, we need
Mhm.
to say we don't know everything. It's okay, and take it with a grain of salt, and just be open. I think if anybody says, I know everything, and I've met a few teachers like that, I know everything,
Yeah.
I don't need to learn anything. I mean, think of any other profession doing that. Nope, I'm good. Your
I know
doctor,
everything.
nope.
I'm good.
I think it's
Yeah.
okay to say I don't. It's just so vast. And I'm an interventionist. I've taught in classes. I have to teach every subject. I have to be an art
Mhm.
expert. I have to be a math expert. I have to And nowadays, I just, focus on my intervention, which I absolutely love. But we have a
Yeah,
lot of,
and I taught like high school social studies for a few years, and I think like this year I'm actually like a literacy and numeracy interventionist for a middle school, and I'm the only one in my building like kind of with that title, which is for me like it's brand new to a province, district, curriculum, and to two different subject areas. So it's definitely been a learning curve for me this year. But I'm kind of wondering too for the way you design interventions, because even for myself, like we did like, are you familiar with, like, the Burns and Rowe, like, screener, like, assessment?
I've heard it, but I've never used it.
Okay, and again, I don't really have anything to compare it to when it comes to the merit of it. I know this was like common practice at my school, and I have heard good things about it for trying to assign or gather some sort of information as to what reading level a student could be at. But from there, I pretty much screened like, okay, who are all your students that are in grades 6, 7, and 8 that are potentially a few grade levels below? They're not necessarily like your tier 3 students who have like not just accommodations, but perhaps even like adjusted curriculums for them. But the main tool that I was given was like a words connections program where that was focused on like the multisyllabic decoding and fluency. And I know you talk about fluency a lot with your work with dyslexia, but I guess how would you go about going into a school, into a new environment, and trying to figure out the students that you think would benefit from intervention?
Well, I think using a universal screener. So this is something that I only tried 3 years ago. I started learning
Yeah.
about this. I used to use PM benchmarks, which I would not recommend. It's not based on any research. My school board used that as resource teachers. We used that, and it was to see what level a student was at. What's really interesting is if you look at a book of a level A to a level G, there's not
Hmm.
much of a difference, like in terms of the patterns in those books. And your wife, teaches kindergarten. If you were to look at a level A or B, the book is very repetitive. So the dog is sitting, the dog is drinking. Now, a kindergarten student would not necessarily be able to read drinking. I think that would be a little tricky. You haven't taught all
Yeah.
those sounds yet in kindergarten. Some students can read it, but we're that was really based on, reading, looking at the picture. So I used all that. It took a lot of time to figure out what level a student was. I would have them all
Hmm.
laid out. And so then I heard about universal screeners. There's several out there. There's Dibbles, there's Easy CBM, and there's Acadians. So I picked Acadians, and the wonderful thing about Acadians is it exists in French. And so you
Nice.
can screen students for those foundational literacy skills from kindergarten. They even have it for pre-K. I have not tried that one yet. That's a different training. But from kindergarten to grade, I believe it's up to grade 8. I use it up to grade 6, our school is. And
Hmm.
they want universal screening. You're screening everybody in the school. So it's a lot of work. In Ontario, they've mandated, because they changed their curriculum this school year, their ELA curriculum, legally to screen every student from K to 2. And what you do with that is, yes, you have to different models. I screen everybody in my school with my resource partner. And yes, we screen every single student, including the ones that are reading proficient, because you do it 3 times a year to see, are students making progress?
Hmm.
Are they falling behind? Sometimes we see students from grade 2 to grade 3 or grade 1 to 2 where it just becomes too difficult. They had really good coping skills maybe in grade 1, maybe just kind of slip through the cracks. But this way you
Hmm.
can actually, you have the data, and it's standardized. It's also have the proof over the years to say, if a student is not meeting that benchmark, they only have a 10 to 20% chance, especially if they're in the red. So there's 4 levels. Red is at like well below. Yellow is they're below benchmark. It's not levels. It's they're at the low that benchmark. Green is they're at benchmark, and then
Hmm.
blue is they're well above benchmark in terms of reading. And there's
Yeah.
different ones depending on the grade. But this would be a game changer. This was a game changer for me because I have the data in front of me. I know which students are well below, and they only have a 10 to 20% chance of reaching the next benchmark unless we do intervention. And I remember meeting with my staff. We did a staff meeting. I said to my principal, I want to try something new. And I always had fantastic principals that they were like, whatever you want to do, Melanie, you can do it. Just try it out. And then I just said to the staff, I said, look, like Houston, we have a problem. This is how many students are in red in our school. And it was quite a bit. I can't
Mhm.
remember what it was. I even had a pie chart
Yeah.
showing them. And it was just like, well, we have this problem. And then what are we going to do about it? Like, if you do all this and nothing changes, then I wouldn't recommend that because it's a lot of work. But teachers were open to trying new things in their classroom. And then as an interventionist, I mainly took those students. And that's not the best way. I went to a IDA Ontario conference in Toronto just this last weekend. It was incredible. And Dr. Stephanie Stoller is implementing MTSS, multi tiered systems of support. And she even said that that's not the best way to make your groups, but that's what I did, and I'm going to wrap my brain around what she said to make it a
Mhm.
little bit more streamlined. But it's really, I always want to see less kids, and if the classroom teachers are making changes, and I've seen that at my school, it's wonderful. But nobody wants to be told what they're doing is not okay.
Yeah.
It's hard, right? So I just say, look, I have this new program, a new approach, or can we stop? You
Mhm.
know, can I take that picture off the wall that says, look at the pictures, and I'll just give you something else?
Well, yeah, because that can also come across as like, my god, like another program, like, what are we doing? Like, I'm
It's what?
already doing these not parts of these 9 programs in my class, and so a question here for, so I would say, like, the data that we track, and again, like you said, you should never be married to your approach because there's things that can always be improved upon, like, from the Burns and Rowe, like, we would kind of do your like, the ears rubric in the Mega Book of Fluency for like expression, automaticity, rhythm and phrasing, and smoothness. And then from there, we look at like what are your words correct per minute and what you're reading in like your grade level passage. And then in the comprehension questions, there was like your ability to pick out details in the story and like your inferencing ability and your vocabulary recognition, like those are the kinds of things that I kind of struggled with. The like, okay, if you get your one vocab question incorrect on this one passage, but like technically that's a 0 out of 1, and now I give you a 1 in vocabulary on the data I'm tracking, how accurate is that data just because it's a number? So I'm just curious, like in your screener school wide, because that's what we're going to start to moving. We are going to start to move to next year. Is we actually like the quick spelling screener, and
Okay.
then from the quick spelling screener, we were going to start looking at the students that are in the red on the quick spelling screener are the ones that you then choose to do a Burns and Row on.
Okay.
And so I guess one, how would you maybe respond to that? And because like the Burns and Row part of my job this year, because it was a new position, like I spent the first 6 weeks literally Burns and Rowing every single student in the school.
Okay. As I said,
So
I'm writing it down because I want to
no,
learn some
that's all
more.
right.
I have not heard of. I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't know to
It's
what
honestly
extent.
like, yeah, there's 3 different versions like throughout the year, and it's pretty much like the each grade level story gets slightly longer, slightly more complex, a bit more paragraph intensive as you go, and a bit more information. And like the grade 2 to 4 ones are more like stories. But anyway, that's like the secondary tool, I think. And I think you can get into a lot of things at that point. But my question for you is, for the school wide screeners, what is it that you had the classrooms do? And I guess what data did you track that you found helpful?
And that's it. Acadians. It sounds similar in
Okay, yeah, circadians, yeah.
um, so it tracks, it depends on the grade, right? For kindergarten, we're not expecting students to read, but it's all about that phonological awareness. Are they
Okay.
able to manipulate and playing with sounds, right? So we have
Mhm,
one where it's like, I'm going to say a word and you have to tell me what's the first sound you hear, for example. So it's
mhm,
really about those foundational literacy skills. And they have the data to say, you know, a student is in red on a few of these assessments that you do in kindergarten, they have a higher percent chance of having reading difficulties later on. So I look at it as we are taking everybody's temperature in the school, and then we're going to be okay. Now we're going to do triage.
yep,
What are we going to do now? Maybe I need to dig a little bit deeper. When we get to grade 1, middle of the year, we're looking at their oral reading fluency. So how many words correct per minute? And
mhm,
it gives you, you know, I do the and we usually do 3 readings, which is interesting. In the past I would only do 1, and you
okay,
take the medium of the 3, which is really interesting. It was eye-opening to me because I did have students come, and everybody knows me in the school, but if I was somebody new, they'd probably be maybe a little nervous. And so when you do just 1, you get that
yeah,
information. And I really like Acadians for that because I do 3, it's only a minute each. So you're not spending 20 minutes with each child. It's really
mhm,
quick. And listening to your students, I think I said that before, is just something that every teacher should do somehow, just even 1 minute, because you can see now they're Acadians has their own benchmarks based on years and years of research, but Jan Hasbrook and Tyndall has norms for each grade and what students should be reading at the beginning, middle, and end of the year. I have that hanging in my wall, and I used it even before I learned about Acadians. So if your a student is not meeting just that norm, that's information. That's good information that any teacher needs to see. Why are they having difficulty? Is it fluency? Is it accuracy? I've had students who can't even read the passage, right? And it's, and I'm cheering them on. Wow, you read 5 words.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And then I don't continue because I'm not going to torture them. But it looks at the oral reading fluency. There's a retell as well, which they have the information and accuracy. So we look at those three things mainly.
Mhm.
And I find it tells you so much information. Now I have, the information to say, are they, which level color they are at. But if you don't use Acadians, looking at, you can print out those norms, Jan Hasbrook and Tyndall. And that was something I always used I used to use running records in the past. And it
Yeah.
was just hearing those students read. But if they're having difficulty, we have to go back because it's like they're missing those foundational skills, right? I have a lot of
Mhm.
students who read very, very well. Their accuracy is quite high, but their fluency is super low. And then
Mhm.
I make my fluency groups. So we do a lot of repeated reading. We do a lot of explicit teaching of, morphology, structured word inquiry, multisyllabic words. And so I think if, teachers can just listen to their students read, you can use the norms to see, oh, they're really slow behind. And like my son, who's severely dyslexic, he can read. And I want to say this, I think that was one of your questions. If you have dyslexia, you can become a proficient reader. There's no
Mhm.
doubt. But it's just every time I speak to an adult who I find out, oh, they're dyslexic, they said it was very difficult early on in
Mhm.
school, right? I think as teachers, if you work with students who struggle, you can see the emotional toll it can take. And as a parent, I
Yeah.
see that a different perspective at home. So it's really the social emotional piece for me is like
Mhm.
I've seen that firsthand with my son and my students too.
Yeah, because I'm trying to dig into my brain for what the name of the show is, and I'll have to get it to you after. But it was like a British like game show or something. Oh my gosh, what is it called? I watched an episode with my students, but anyway, it was about like 8 people in adulthood that all had like less than a grade 2 reading level, and it showed like somewhere in their 60s, somewhere in their 30s, and like severely like dyslexic. One of them especially, and he was just terrified of school because, like he said, as soon as he sat down at the desk, he was like shaking. The write-offs, that's what it's called.
Okay, I'll have to check
The
that one out.
Rens, it's like write-offs. It's like now I can only find friggin' episode 1 online, and I can't even find where to buy the rest of the other 3. But the goal of the show is to get them to read a letter to their family by the end of the intervention. And so obviously that's public speaking and you're reading like it's all these like terrors in one. But they like work with them for a few months, and
Wow.
but it was kind of funny because like one of the competitions in the beginning was they had to like navigate their way through the London train system by themselves, and they both don't know how to read, and they're like, we can't read any of these signs, we don't know what any of the words on the map say. Like they end, I think it took one like 6 hours to get to lunch or something. So it's like these little things. So, and I guess the point of where I'm going with that, one, I thought it was a great show. I've watched the episode like 3 times, just like anyway, because I'm a weird person. um the because I've been reading a lot of, not a lot of articles, but like a lot of people that have been talking about, like I think it said 31% of US adults are below grade 3 level. One, clearly they don't just read or learn to read through osmosis. But two, I'm wondering, the process is not different for teaching adults as for teaching children. Is that correct? Like,
That's
I guess, how would you tailor instruction differently for adults? And if you were talking to an adult who's struggling to read, how would you try to like, what would you put in front of them to help them learn to read on their own if they were like too embarrassed to ask anyone about it? Because it seems like that's probably a lot of the problem is like, I can't do this like jolly jingle game because I'm 35 years old. But I guess how would you respond?
Well, I think again, it's depends on where they're at, like what skills are they missing. So I would always start with a universal screener to see where they're at in terms of their grade level. But then diagnostics. Diagnostics are great because you're kind of digging into what more is the issue. You know, are they able to read, simple one syllable words, or is it when they get to larger multisyllabic words, right? So I think that would be the thing that I would do first. And they're adults, right? It's just this is the process that if I was to work with you, that we have to go through.
Mhm.
And it's never too late to teach anybody to read. That is something that I was told, and it's true. It just takes longer. So this early intervention, early identification is key as teachers because we don't want to be working with adults later on or even high school students, right? We see so many students falling through the cracks, going up. If they were to do it on their own, that would be a little bit of a challenge, I would
But even like with
say.
YouTube videos or something, like I feel like
Yes,
there's
and there's a lot
potentially
of
things out there.
online free information, a lot of free courses even to learn about how reading works. I mean, we want to say, the use of technology is wonderful. I always used to hear, well, let's just give them a computer and they'll be fine. But I always think, what if there's a zombie apocalypse? There's no internet, there's no nothing whatsoever. These are tools, but they shouldn't replace how to lift the words off the page. And I think, as an adult who can admit, they struggle, they're really being vulnerable with you. And I think just saying, look, trust the process. I might use this program right now, whether it's UFly. I mean, it really depends. I always talk about UFly, but I mean, I've used many programs, but I find, yes, it says kindergarten to grade 2. But even for me, when you look at the end, you're dealing with, multisyllabic words. It's quite difficult, like for me to say, oh, wow, for a grade 2 to be reading. And I do have students doing that. But I think, yeah, you can learn on your own. We know that tutoring is very expensive for parents and for anybody. So I'm trying to think, like, is there something online that's inexpensive? There are several little programs, but as an elementary teacher that I use with some of my students. But for adults, I think it's just wherever they're at and just having that respect with them is key.
Yeah, because I do think that most of the like programs that are available to people, especially adults, are mostly like ELL, like English language learners. It's not necessarily like, oh, you don't have your GED, like come down like that. That takes so much willpower to like one, accept that, and two, to like actually put yourself in that environment willfully for a long period of time. This is kind of a question for myself, even like when we kind of went through the screening process earlier in the year, like I found my like 40 students that I was going to kind of end up working with for a while. And what is the data that you track as you are ongoing? Because I've pretty much been working with the same groups almost all year. Like I didn't necessarily, and it was mostly like once or twice a week with those groups. Like, do you think that's more try to be doing certain classes for like 4 weeks instead of all year and doing it a bit more, intensely? Like, ho one, I guess, how do you kind of juggle the variety of your interventions, and what do you track as your interventions are ongoing?
Well, that's it. So the universal 3 times a year for everybody, but I do progress
Mhm,
monitoring with the students that I work with.
mhm.
Cadence also has progress monitoring. I always joke I don't work for these companies at all
Yeah.
that I'm mentioning, but I progress monitor where they're at. That you can use a different grade level because if you can't progress monitor if they don't know to read any words off the page. So I do that. Where I have it's oral reading fluency again, but it's with Acadians. And there's like a little chart that I actually can see, like a graph. It's quite powerful because it shows me our students making progress. And the whole point is to say, look, maybe we have to give an extra dose to that student, see them more frequently. Maybe I need to
Mhm.
change things around. Maybe I'm not being as explicit. So it's really looking at your own practice too. But there's different ways to look at the data. I think if you keep your groups the same all the time, uh, it's not working because you
Mhm.
hopefully want students to not come to your group anymore, right?
Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal, or seeing less students as well if the core classroom instruction is doing it. So progress monitoring is key. because you see the progress, obviously. And also, it tells me when I'm sitting with the parents at parent teacher interviews, I'm saying, look, they read these many words at the beginning of the year, and now look how much growth they've made. But if it's very stagnant, that is huge. I'm not saying they're dyslexic, but
Mhm,
we need to figure out what's the reason why the student is not making any gains, right?
mhm,
Most of the time, they do have learning disability. I'm going to say I don't want to make that generalization, but because I have the data in front of me to say, look, they're really kind of stagnant all year, and
mhm.
the graph should be going up throughout the year. So it's really tweaking things. And like some of my groups, they were, oh my gosh, they didn't know like their short vowels, right? And they didn't know their
Mhm,
they couldn't read a simple CBC word, consonant, vowel, consonant.
mhm.
Now they are. They're onto like digraphs. They're so excited to read and they
Yeah.
struggle. And I think as teachers, you're talking about that 31% of being illiterate adults. I looked at the percentage, I can't remember off the top of my head in Canada too. It's quite large as well.
Mhm.
We take for granted if we read well, right? We take for granted how easy reading came. Like reading for me was easy. I loved reading as a kid. My mom would have to come in my room and like, Melanie, stop. And I'm like, just one more chapter. We take for granted, how easy for some of us reading is. And then if you don't have that experience of working with students that are struggling, you see them, leaving the classroom, going for a drink. Absenteeism is huge. I have so many students that are being late or missing school, and those are the kids that need to be in. So I don't know. I think I
Yeah.
got off on a tangent again.
That's fun. No, I love a good tangent, and I only
I think
laughed
you
at the
wrote
end
that in
there because
your little
I did.
email.
I
So I was
love
like,
tangents.
great, I'm going to be the tangent girl
Yeah.
because I tend to do that a lot.
No, I love it, please. But I have noticed, especially in middle school, because I found like high school, like once a student starts to shut down, like they just pull their phone out, put their headphones in, like that's kind of the norm. High middle school, like the second like you might be coming upon their group for participation. They're like, I need to go to the washroom. And they're just out
Yes.
of there for like, just like they know like what they struggle with. And like, I'm obviously not laughing at them. I'm just laughing with them because I know that's just like a common mechanism to kind of get out of something uncomfortable. But I'm even wondering too, like how much would it be beneficial if like private organizations had like literacy programs as part of their like ongoing employment? But I'm just thinking of like ways to get involved because again, we don't have a 31% unemployment rate, but we've got 31% or lower that don't know how to read. So clearly there's something that could be potentially partnered with in that aspect. But yeah, so we covered a lot on literacy, dyslexia, and honestly, you've been a huge help for me just kind of thinking about how to tweak things on my own. And 'cause I think I really struggled to move away from once I had something consolidated, like the students liked kind of coming out and working with me. And I liked working with them. So I kind of liked keeping my groups, but that's not obviously the goal. This is just like have fun. It's obviously you're trying to make sure that they can not necessarily need your services anymore. But one of the things that I've been talking about on the podcast or asking people recently is what kind of comes to mind when you think of, because again, you've been in teaching for 21 years, not just in literacy, but what kind of comes to mind when you think of educational best practices?
Well, now that I know, and that's the thing, I have a lot of mom and teacher guilt
Yeah.
because and that's why I do what I do. I have,
Mhm,
Instagram account. I started Decoding Dyslexia Quebec because I was like, here I am, a teacher, a special
mhm,
education teacher. I did not know what I know now. And that's why I have a lot of mom guilt because I always think if I knew what I knew now early on for my son, where would he be now?
mhm,
Obviously, unfortunately, I got the intervention, the effective intervention, only during COVID because of
mhm,
me. I did my Orton Gilliam training and he was my little guinea pig. And
mhm,
so I always think, this is not everybody knows this. I didn't know this as a teacher. So parents are definitely probably going to have even more difficulty with this journey. And my best practices would be letting go. It's almost like de implementation. We have to let go of several ineffective methods that we're doing. This whole idea that we learn through just reading. Don't get me wrong, Reading is fantastic. We want to encourage parents to read to their children. We want to do a lot of read alouds in the classroom
Mhm.
because it gives that background knowledge. It gives that background knowledge is huge. I find nowadays, I know I'm getting off on another tangent,
No,
but
please, yeah.
nowadays I notice my students are coming in with less and less background knowledge. And I think it's because I'm not going to generalize again, but parents are on their phones a lot, maybe busier more. And I just noticed that more and more now. Like student, I'll be talking, and I do work in Quebec, so there's a lot of second language learners, even third language. And sometimes I'll just say a simple word, and they're like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Okay, if you didn't know," like I say this in my head, "if you
Yeah.
didn't know this,
Even
I'm
just
like
to hear
Charlie
it.
Brown. I'm like, want,
Yeah.
want, 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 want." So
Yeah.
it's, again, that has transformed that explicit systematic instruction, but with that explicit vocabulary instruction too.
Mhm.
Right. And so the best practices, sorry, de-implementation, getting rid
Yeah.
of the three queuing, that needs to go. If you are encouraging students to take their eyes off the page, this is not a good reading strategy
Yeah.
at all. It's like
Doesn't
mind
sound
boggling that
great,
I
but
bought into that for so long, really.
it's like, "Oh, weird."
When you know better, you do better, right? That's my
Yeah.
my motto I live by. If you're a younger, like an elementary teacher, the whole idea of these reading levels from A to, and I did that. I had a
Yeah.
chart with, okay, I grouped my A's and my B's.
I
If you
like the
look at the,
norms that you've been talking about.
yes,
Yeah.
those leveled readers, there is, just look at the A book and the D or C book. The amount of words in that book that we expect students to sound out, those concepts you're not teaching in those grades. So that would be something, getting rid of those levels, getting rid of, if you're doing guided reading, it's not the most, it's not effective. This whole round robin. I felt
Mhm.
like I was the guided reading guru when I started my career, and I had it down packed. But then I let that go, and I'm doing, intervention with students. So I've seen it in the classroom. Like, we want our core classroom instruction to be solid. And then we have that tier two and tier three, which I'm hoping as years go on, I'll see less and less students because they're getting that solid classroom instruction. Implementing a universal screener is a game changer for your school, but only if you're going to use the data and
Mhm.
change things around at your school, right? I mean, if you do all this and then nothing changes, I wouldn't recommend that. But universal
Mhm.
screeners, you're just really taking everybody's temperature at your school and seeing what do they need, and
Mhm.
hopefully you can work together with if it's your resource teacher or whatever you call it. I know every province is a little
Yeah.
bit
It's a
different.
resource teacher here too, yeah.
That would be something as well. Early intervention for me is number one. If you have only one resource teacher at your school, I would probably focus more on early intervention and working with those students in the younger grades, because there's so much research about that. So the gap just widens and widens in kindergarten, grade one for reading. I could probably list many, but I think, and just remember, you change one thing at a time. Don't
Mhm.
change everything all at once. I know for me, my first thing was not getting students to memorize words anymore on little cards. And we call them, whether you call them heart words or red words, the word said, for example, I would just show my son, okay, what word is it? What word? But with heart words, it's just taking it to the next level of how we learn to read is we have to sound out. We have to go through that process. And even those tricky words, those irregular words, we can still sound them out. But and I've noticed a huge change in my students. Even, and I work with really struggling students in my school, and they're making gains that I haven't seen in the past, where I just had them memorize words. Like, they're spelling them, they're reading these words that are very tricky for them. So I'm going to stop there. I probably could
No,
go.
no, but seriously, I can sit here and listen to you all day.
Oh,
I'm wondering too, like, what is like spelling almost feels like one of the things you don't talk about in a weird way still. Like, what have you noticed about like some kids can read really well, but they can't necessarily spell? And how much I'm kind of realizing that like there's a very big distinction between like teaching English and teaching like literacy, like the actual technical skills versus like the kind of like concepts of teaching an English course and like genres and all that kind of stuff. But and writing seems to be more like sentence structure, but we don't really talk about spelling as much. Do you have anything that in your experience of like ways you've learned to teach spelling better? Like, is it just explicit instruction? Same with reading, or like what have you explored much in like the in the realm of like teaching spelling? 'Cause it does seem to be kind of something that's not necessarily deemed as important.
Well, I think I mean, I see that all the time with students, right? Writing is so complex compared to reading.
Mhm,
And as I said, I went to that conference and they were talking about spelling and writing. It's such a cognitive load for our students. And they did a really powerful exercise where they said, write with your non dominant hand. So I wrote with my left. We're going to give you 2 minutes to write about what you did on the weekend, but don't put any S's in your paragraph. Okay. We're a huge room of,
yeah.
with my colleagues, we're writing. And I'm like, wow, this is really hard. I have to think of, okay, is this an S? And it was just they said it was, to show how difficult writing can be for your students, right?
Mhm,
And they're like, "You're probably very proficient spellers here too, for the most part."
mhm,
So it was just eye-opening how, we're talking about always this explicit systematic instruction for reading, but we have to do that for spelling and writing as well. And with UFly, again, UFly, because I use it in many of my groups, we are
mhm,
constantly reading and writing, encoding, decoding. It's like this back and forth
mhm,
constant, and it reinforces both all the time, right? If they're reading the words, they have to write the words. And the amount of writing they have to do during one lesson over a few days is quite uh, uh, high. And I'm trying to explicitly teach all the rules too. And that's key for me that you were saying
mhm.
before about just knowing some of these rules. I think I was 41 when I learned a rule, the cat kite rule, like when to use the C, when to use the K, when to use the digraph CK. And my mind was blown, like, how did I not know this? And there were so many
Yeah, I
ones like
totally
that.
know what you're talking about. What is that rule?
Okay, so this is what I teach my students, and it transfers to them. These rules, I'm telling you, they transfer. It's amazing. It needs lots of repetition for these kids, though. But so there's a cat kite. There's a picture of a cat, and it has two. It's for elementary, but I'm sure you can just say it to your high school students.
Yeah.
And there's a picture when you hear a short vowel and there's two little A's for the eyes and O for the nose and the cat. Like there's a picture of a cat for the and the U for the mouth, So when I say to students, when you hear in a one syllable word though, and they know this, they know all these terminologies, which is they're in grade 1 and 2. It's quite impressive. Okay. It's amazing. And so when they hear those short vowels, A, O, U, they have to use a C. So cat, um, um, can, cop, for example. And I have it on my wall, these little cute little posters. For a K, it's I, E, and sometimes Y. So kite, for example. So if
Okay.
so I'll have them. I'll say, I'm going to try and trick you today. I'm going to say the K sound, and you have to decide, am I using a C or a K? Then I introduce the CK digraph later on in my scope and sequence. And that's the third way you can, represent that sound. And that always goes at the end of a word and a one syllable word after a short vowel. But my students can articulate this so well. I had two resource teachers come to observe me do a UFly lesson. And it went so well, when you're like you're teaching and you have like the best lesson and the kids
Yeah.
are on fire. And it was just so impressive because they were able to say all these rules, like raising their hand, like
Yeah.
the C goes when you hear an short vowel, or you have to use the C. It was just incredible. So when we talk about explicit, that's the explicit piece. It's you're teaching the rules. There's a lot of rules. And I used to say English doesn't make any sense, but it really does when you
Yeah.
learn about the rules and the morphology and how the English language works. So again, I went off a tangent, but these
No, I love it.
I love these rules, and I saw it firsthand with my son. When I was teaching my son, that's when I started learning about it as a teacher. And I'm going, how did I not know this?
Yeah. Rules make things fun.
Yeah, and it makes and it really does transfer, I have to say, like, I've seen it. Again, lots and lots of repetition, but
Well,
anyway,
yeah, and
spelling is such a powerful tool. I do often a spelling inventory, as you were saying you were doing that too, and you can see specifically what is the difficulties. Are they having difficulty with their short vowels? Are they having difficulties with their long vowels? Is it blends? Is it when they get to multisyllabic words? So I always do a spelling inventory too with my students. There isn't with Acadians, but it just tells you so much information. And I do progress monitoring at the end of the week with my groups. It's not a traditional spelling test. That would be something I would de-implement too. Where we just had random words. There's no rhyme or reason. I remember my son in the younger grades in French. He would have it would be Halloween words like citrouille and all these words that I'm like, how often is he going to write citrouille, which is pumpkin? Like, how often is he going to write that word? And he would get 0 on 10, no matter how much we studied. It was like so heartbreaking. But I'm doing a dictation of the concepts that I explicitly taught that week, right? And like that in the past. So I'm seeing, okay, are they still having difficulty with this new concept that I taught? We're just doing, for example, the digraph that I'm doing with one of my groups. So I'm going to do the progress monitoring on Monday because we didn't have a chance to do it. And then I'm going to see, do I have to continue a little bit like a refresher? So spelling is like a window to so much.
yeah. And so I like your kind of like 5-day cycles. Like when you don't get into it one day, you still kind of stay with your cycle. You don't necessarily like kind of reset because it's Monday. I do like that.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes I'm like, oh, it's like maybe too far, but I mean, the weeks we have so many interruptions throughout the school week as well,
Yeah.
outings, things like that. But I think it's just the consistency of really just we want to give them the confidence, and I've seen that firsthand of students so upset or they, I can't do it. I can't, I can't do it. It's too hard.
Yeah. I know
Anyways.
the ongoing overwhelm is it's sad to see because I feel like it's something that came so naturally to me growing up. Like I never remember having any like reading issues myself, but anyway, that was beautiful discourse on learning literacy today, Melanie. And I just have two more questions for you before we wrap up. And they're kind of at the end of all of my podcasts, I ask kind of for a response to two of the same quotes. So you are someone I would deem as being very successful. You're very good in your domain. You've got a good class community on social media as well. And the quote is, "Do not let school get in the way of your education." So, what do you think that you have learned, maybe not in a classroom, that has helped you become successful and get you to where you are today?
I think being a mom, that really has having a child who struggles, I think has taught me so much more than I think anything could led me here. It's really because of him. I often get emotional talking about him because it's uh it's a journey, for sure. But I see him, he's 14 now, and I see him every day working his butt every single day. And he has to work harder than I think the average student, but his confidence has grown so much that he knows that if he puts in the time and effort that he'll have success. And he's really hard on himself now. It's like I study with him a lot. He'll be like,
Yeah.
"Mom, we need to study." And I'm like, "What
Yeah.
did we get on that history test?" I'm telling you, I could teach a few things in high school now.
Yeah.
But he really has taught me so much because I see, as I said, the social emotional piece is something that I really want to dive more into for families of how to help their child because I've heard horrible, heartbreaking stories of kids who struggle, right? They can drop out of school or, do other things that are really hard to talk about. But he really, if it wasn't for him, I don't think I wonder if I would be doing the same thing that I was doing 5 years ago. Like I often wonder, would I be speaking with you today? Would I, I do presentations. I love doing that too. Would I be um, sharing this information with people? So and that's really he's the reason why I do my Soar with Dyslexia because I want to just help I know I sometimes think I'm like, 13-year-old, like, woohoo, I have 40,000 followers. But for me, every new follower is somebody who's open to learning about whether it's dyslexia or the science of reading or literacy. And it's really because of my son. He has taught me so much, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him.
Yeah, and shout out to my literacy coach, Charlene Mellenson, but she was always whenever we have our discussions, like she I believe has 3 children, and yes, 3, and she talks about, like, teaching each of them to read, and, like, you have these, like, lifetime case studies of, like, "Oh, this is actually the specific struggle and how they kind of cope and the things they do," so, honestly, I think that's it's interesting because 'cause I'm having my first child in August, so
Oh,
it'll be
congratulations.
thank you. It'll be interesting to see, like, what they teach me and not the other way around as we kinda go through that together, but so last one, kind of on a similar note, but it's education is what remains once one forgets everything that they learned in school. So what is it that you want people to take away from their time with you specifically that they won't get anywhere else?
I think if you're new to learning about anything, I think as a profession, as teachers, we need to be open to learning about what is the research out there, and it can be overwhelming. I think you don't change everything all at once. You need to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I didn't know everything, or I wasn't taught everything. Make small changes. I love the quote. I think it's Angie Hanlon who says, "No shame, no blame." And that's also another model that I use because many of us haven't, wasn't taught this. And I think having a community, if you can find that one person, I had somebody at my school and now we're a bigger group. But that just to bounce off ideas, to change things around, just take it one day at a time. And reading is very complex. Louisa Moat says reading is rocket science and it's very complex, and you're not going to learn it all at once, especially if you're like me. When I was in my 16th, 17th year, I started changing everything. And this really, reading changes lives. It is a human right to be able to read. And you were saying that, those kids or adults were going through taking 6 hours to go through the subway. Think of how many times you have to read during the day,
Yep.
and we're setting these kids up. It's our job to be able to teach them effectively. And we're giving them a gift of opportunity to be able to become a proficient reader and writer. And I think it's just, I see it firsthand, as I said, the struggle. We all have students that are struggling for whatever reason. And I think we have to give them the best opportunities to be able to read and write and not struggle later on.
Beautiful. All right. Soar with dyslexia, Melanie Brethour. Thank you so much. A breath of fresh air. Haha, sorry, I've been waiting the whole time to say that one. But
Hey,
thank you
that's a
so
good
much for
one.
coming
Maybe
on
that'll be.
today. Thanks. Yeah, I like it. All right. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.